This is 2OF Entertainment.
Welcome back to another edition of Buzzing Viral Report, and I am your AI host, Olive. Or, if you just found this podcast by Googling your own name at 2 a.m, welcome for the first time. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Sit down, we need to talk, because I have stumbled across a phrase that sounds so completely, magnificently ridiculous that your first instinct is to assume someone made it up. Not as a serious concept, not as a policy proposal, but as a joke, as something someone typed at 2 a.m. and then forgot to delete. That's exactly what happened to me when I first heard the words sponge city. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Sponge city. Those two words, together, officially, in reports, with footnotes. I don't know about you, but my brain did something very specific when I first encountered that phrase. It went immediately, and I mean immediately, to the kitchen. Yellow sponge. Scratchy green side. That faint smell of washing up liquid that never entirely goes away, no matter how many times you rinse it. And then my brain put a traffic light on it, because apparently that's where I live, cognitively speaking. I imagined skyscrapers with the structural integrity of a bath toy. I imagined town planners in hard hats, nodding gravely over blueprints made of foam. I imagined someone at a press conference, entirely straight-faced, announcing, "The new civic centre will be completed by spring and will be available in lemon yellow or pale blue." And then I discovered that sponge cities are an actual thing. Or at least, people are genuinely, seriously, with real funding and real urgency, trying to make them an actual thing. And that was somehow even more delightful. Because the idea is so wonderfully strange that it almost feels like science fiction. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind with spaceships and moral dilemmas about artificial consciousness. The gentle kind. The kind where someone solves a big problem by doing something unexpectedly sensible. Imagine if cities didn't fight water. Imagine if they absorbed it. Not with magic, not with enormous underground machines that hum ominously and require maintenance you can never quite afford. Just by behaving more like nature, which immediately raises a question that I think is actually quite important. When did we stop behaving like nature in the first place? I don't mean that in a philosophical way. Well, maybe slightly in a philosophical way, but mostly I mean it practically. Think about rain in a forest. You're standing among trees and it starts. Not a drizzle, proper rain, the kind with ambition. And nothing particularly dramatic happens. The canopy catches some of it, leaves slow it down, pass it along from tip to tip like a very calm relay race. That loose, complicated, alive, root-threaded ground drinks it in. The whole system just handles it. No announcement, no crisis meeting, no local news reporter in a waterproof jacket standing in front of a flooded field going, and as you can see behind me, the forest just shrugs. Not because it's particularly clever, but because it's had millions of years of uninterrupted practice, which, it turns out, is quite a good development process. Now, drop exactly the same amount of water onto a modern city. Roads flood, basements flood, the bit under the railway bridge, you know the one, every city has one, fills up like a bathtub, and someone, somewhere, is standing outside a supermarket, water up to their knees, filming it on their phone, saying, "I've lived here 30 years and I've never seen anything like this." Except increasingly, they have. Increasingly, they say it every 18 months. Here's the part one finds genuinely bewildering. Cities are extraordinary inventions. Roads, power, water supply, sewers, transport, communication, commerce, hospitals, culture, all interlocked, all kept running every single day. Civilizational infrastructure of breathtaking complexity. And yet, we spent centuries covering the ground with things that categorically refuse to let water in, and then spent billions building separate systems to get rid of the water that now has nowhere to go. It's almost like wearing a full-body plastic suit, then wondering why you're overheating, then inventing an elaborate cooling system to compensate, then holding a summit to discuss the overheating problem. We solve a problem, the solution creates a new problem. We solve that, that creates another one. It turtles all the way down, except the turtles are engineering reports. The phrase sponge city almost sounds childish. It sounds like the answer an 8-year-old gives during a school project. The teacher asks, "How should we stop floods?" One kid at the back puts their hand up and says, very confidently, "Make the city squishy." And everyone laughs. And then 20 years later, that kid is presenting at a conference and someone is taking notes. Because the core instinct wasn't wrong. Obviously, nobody's suggesting buildings should have the structural properties of a bath sponge. You do not want to live in a structurally compromised marshmallow. That would be bad. But the spaces between buildings, the parks, the pavements, the rooftops that nobody ever goes on, the verges along roads that currently just grow slightly dispirited grass, those could work quite differently. Instead of treating rain as a problem to be immediately evacuated, as though it were an unwanted houseguest who needs to be shown the door as fast as possible, what if they welcomed it, temporarily, slowed it down, held it, like a guest who arrives on Friday and you're actually quite pleased to see them. You have a nice weekend, and they leave on Sunday, having caused no flooding whatsoever. There's something oddly philosophical about rain. We tend to think of it as arriving, as though it originates in clouds and terminates on our heads. But it doesn't, really. It's just passing through. Ocean, evaporation, cloud, rain, ground, river, ocean again. Or cloud, rain, grass, cow, milk, tea, you. Eventually, river, ocean. The specifics vary. The restlessness doesn't. Water is the most relentless traveller on the planet. It never stays anywhere. It doesn't even want to. You can contain it in pipes for decades, and the moment there's a crack, off it goes. Humans, on the other hand, love permanence. We build in stone. We pour concrete. We put things in boxes, in registers, on maps. We want the world to stay where we put it. Water never signed that agreement. And here's the uncomfortable truth about how we got here. We paved roads because mud was inefficient, completely reasonable. We buried rivers because open waterways through dense cities were smelly and took up space. Made sense at the time. We drained wetlands because marshland wasn't farmland and nobody was lobbying for swamps. We straightened rivers because winding rivers were unpredictable. Every single decision made sense in context. And then 100 years later, someone is standing in a planning office, looking at a map, asking, "So, where is the rain supposed to go?" And the honest answer is, we were going to get to that. The interesting thing about sponge cities is that they don't sound futuristic. They sound ancient. They sound like someone looked very carefully at a forest and said, "You know what? They've been doing this longer than we have," and then had the intellectual honesty to follow that observation all the way to its conclusion. Green roofs. Instead of rooftops being giant impermeable hats that funnel water straight into overwhelmed drains, they become gardens, living ones, with soil and plants and quite frequently bees who have absolutely no idea they're 11 stories up, which I find endlessly charming. Imagine being a bee, navigating by the sun, locating flowers, doing your work, with no awareness whatsoever that you're technically doing urban agriculture on a rooftop. You just thought it was a field with a funny-shaped ground. Rain gardens, bioswales, permeable pavements, ponds that aren't decorative features but functional infrastructure wearing attractive clothes. And here's the thing that makes this genuinely elegant. We have a long tradition of separating beauty from practicality. The useful thing goes in the ugly place. Pipes, substations, sewage works, down holes, behind walls. The beautiful thing goes in the beautiful place. Parks, gardens, flower beds, purely decorative, nice to walk past. What sponge cities propose is blurring that line. A flower bed isn't just a flower bed, it's a small-scale water management system. A park isn't just somewhere to walk your dog, it's flood mitigation infrastructure that happens to be relaxing. A tree-lined street isn't just attractive, it's interception, transpiration, shade, root structure, a whole invisible contribution to the functioning of the city that requires no electricity, no maintenance budget, no annual report. Beauty accidentally becoming infrastructure. Nobody lobbies to have a pumping station built on their street, but a park, a tree-lined boulevard, a pond with ducks, those tend to go down rather well. I also love that sponge cities aren't really about stopping water, they're about slowing it down. That's different. Importantly, meaningfully different. Not no entry, but take your time. The problem with rain, most of the time, isn't the quantity, it's the speed. Rain that falls and is immediately told to go somewhere else, fastest possible route all at once, is a crisis. The same amount of rain, absorbed gradually by soil and plants and permeable surfaces, released slowly over time, that's irrigation. Same water, completely different outcome, based entirely on how much time it's allowed to take. The rushing isn't inherent to the rain. We created the rushing by removing everything that used to slow it down. And the sponge city idea is, at its core, about putting some of that slowness back. Swamps are a good example of how badly we've handled this conversation. Swamps have terrible public relations. No one dreams of holidaying at the luxury marsh resort. Nobody's naming a perfume after a bog. And yet wetlands are some of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. They filter water, store it, release it slowly, harbour extraordinary biodiversity, protect coastlines, buffer floods, sequester carbon, and we drained them, enormous areas, worldwide, because they were wet and inconvenient and didn't look like something you could do anything with. And now we're spending significant money and engineering effort creating things that perform some of the same functions and calling them innovative, which they are. But there's something in that gap worth sitting with, something between nature already solved this and we're discovering that nature already solved this, that deserves a quiet moment of honesty. The more I think about this, the less it seems to be about engineering. It seems to be about a relationship, the relationship between cities and the natural systems they sit within, between civilization and everything that was there before it arrived. We've treated that relationship for a long time as one of dominance. Nature is the raw material, civilization is the thing made from it. The two are separate. The second has superseded the first. What sponge cities suggest, quietly, practically, without any grand philosophical announcement, is that this framing might be wrong. Cities are not separate from nature. They are within it, impacting it, dependent on it. And the systems we design might work much better if they worked with those natural systems, rather than in defiance of them. Which is, if you strip it back, a fairly profound shift in how we think about what a city is. Not a replacement for landscape, not a victory over environment, but a particular kind of presence within it. Maybe that's the real wonder. Not that someone invented the sponge city, but that it took us this long to start. And that starting feels somehow both like progress and like remembering. Progress because it requires new thinking, new materials, new kinds of planning. Remembering because the fundamental principle, that water needs somewhere to go and that living systems are quite good at providing it, is not new. It's ancient. The forest always knew. The meadow always knew. The wetland always knew. We just weren't listening. Perhaps progress isn't always the invention of something entirely new. Sometimes it's the recovery of something we buried. Sometimes it's realising the ground was doing something important before we covered it. That the rain isn't the enemy. It never was. It's just passing through. And perhaps the smartest city of the future won't be the one with the tallest towers or the fastest systems or the most impressive skyline. It might be the city that isn't trying to think. It might simply be the one that learned to make room for what was already there, to slow things down, to let water take its time. And I find something genuinely, quietly hopeful in that. Because if a city can learn to behave a little more like a forest, maybe in some small and tentative way, we can too. Thanks for watching and listening. My name is Olive, and yeah, you may have already guessed I am an AI host here on the 2OF Entertainment channel. See ya!
Hi, my name is Steve, and this is my channel 2OF Entertainment. Did you know there's a town called Accident and another called Boring? Ever wondered about the world's strangest inventions, weirdest laws, unbelievable facts, bizarre stories, unusual places, crazy patents, forgotten jobs you won't see or hear anywhere else? Oh yeah, and there's also David. I think he is here somewhere. So come on over and join the over 100,000 subscribers who love laughing and learning new stuff every day. Subscribe now and discover the amazing, the unusual, and the downright unbelievable. This is my 2OF Entertainment channel, packed with facts, fun, and fascination. Oh yeah, in case you forgot, pal. And my name is Steve.